want to talk to you a little bit about how people justify violence, how that relates to the problems of evil and suffering, and how that manifests in modern-day conflicts like what's happening in Gaza. In order to do that, I have to repeat myself on a few points because I want them consolidated in a single video. So if you've heard me speak about those things before, please bear with me because I do have some new things to say as well. See, there's something that religious people have to do that non-religious people don't. You know what it is? See, the world makes sense to the non-believer as it is. It requires no further explanation than what nature itself tells us. Non-believers have that luxury. Religious people, however, have to tell themselves stories to make sense of the world. That's because their beliefs don't align with the reality we witness on a daily basis. So they need the stories in order to reconcile the discrepancies. Think of it like a translator. Religious people don't speak the language of reality, so religion translates for them, which is a disadvantage as far as discerning truth, because much is lost in translation. So remember that it's all about stories and language. Those two things shape perception. That's how a religious person can think that they're living in such a magical world with God and the devil constantly interacting everywhere, and how they can believe demons and angels are all around them, while a non-religious person just sees the mundane, normal, natural world as it is. For instance, the general unfairness and injustice of the world makes sense to the non-believer. What we see in reality perfectly fits with what we should expect to see. Pain evolved because organisms that can detect injury act accordingly for their own protection and are thus more likely to perpetuate the species. Pain caused the fear of injury, resulting in organisms working to avoid it. Nature's incentive structure. There's no mythology required. That's just how it happened, as all the evidence indicates. That's why the distribution of suffering cares not about who does or does not deserve to experience it. Deserves got nothing to do with it.
I don't deserve this. To die like this. Deserves got nothing to do with it.
The problem with those facts is that they're only the hows. But people crave whys, even when there is no why. And that's because people create whys by doing things for specific reasons, so they project this intentional behavior onto nature itself. That desire for non-existent whys to be answered is what causes human beings to conflate hows with whys. That causes us to anthropomorphize nature, which is, of course, the true origin of God and religion, the anthropomorphizing of nature. It is far simpler, far less romantic, and far less appealing than the religious stories that make us out to be special. Pain and suffering is a purely cold and mechanical process. If you don't put enough oil in your engine will suffer for it. The check oil warning light will turn on. Well, for us, our warning light is a pain signal, which is variable depending on the severity. It's all natural machinery, and that's why these mechanisms will go through their motions regardless of extenuating circumstances. In other words, breaking a bone is going to hurt and continue to hurt, regardless of factors like how much of a good person you are, or whether the pain has done its job of informing you and you know not to use your arm. It doesn't matter. It's still going to continue to hurt. There's no intelligent force behind the pain signals, so the pain will continue even when it's no longer necessary. That's just a result of millions of years of evolution. It makes sense. In nature, there is no justice. In nature, the sick and the young are hunted first. Just getting a drink of water can result in a painful death. Justice has a specific, recognizable pattern, but no such pattern emerges in nature. Blameless babies suffer and die, and that is the result of just the pure, cold, uncaring mechanics of nature at work. It's all explainable, all observable. The most noble, charitable, and selfless person can suffer in agony for years until they die, while the greediest, most corrupt, and contemptible person can live a life of decadence and luxury until they pass away comfortably in their sleep at a ripe old age. To add insult to injury, both of these people can have completely distorted self-awareness, and all the people around them can be just as mistaken as they are. The selfless person may very well feel like they are not good, like they're inadequate, causing them to feel depressed and unfulfilled. And others may look down upon them for their lack of apparent accomplishments, thereby reinforcing their negative self-esteem, even if their impact is quite meaningful. Meanwhile, the greedy person may feel like they are supremely benevolent and a vital pillar of the community, making them feel quite happy and fulfilled, and others may even look up to them and their ill-gotten gains as commendable accomplishments, thereby reinforcing the greedy person's distorted sense of self-worth, even if they actually had a net negative impact. This extremely unfair and unjust world is exactly the type of world that would be produced from a nature that is rooted in survival and taking advantage. It is not the world that would be produced by a supremely powerful and benevolent God. To even attempt to make sense of that so that they can keep their God belief, people tell themselves all kinds of stories. As I said, stories and language shape perception. We invented many stories throughout history to explain it. From our fall in the Garden of Eden, to God's desire for us to have free will, to a grand, mysterious plan that will make sense of it all in the end. Each of these stories are grotesquely immoral in their own unique ways. Thus, they often instill in religious people a way of moral reasoning that is conducive to atrocity. That's the danger of coming up with ways to justify the unjustifiable, unlike the non-believer who knows that there's no justice in nature. Attempting to justify the unjustifiable is part of the injustice, part of how people see bad as good and good as bad. The stories and language don't just shape perception, they distort it. The first story attempts to blame everyone with inherited guilt. This is how the pain and suffering of the world is explained. They tell themselves that our current fallen state was not part of the original design, and that our perfect Creator did not intend for us to be this way, as blatantly paradoxical as that excuse is. They tell themselves that we were originally designed not to suffer, but it was we who messed up by disobeying this perfectly good God, and thus ruined paradise for ourselves. As if an omniscient God would not know the result of his creative act ahead of time. Of course he would, which would speak to his intent for us to be precisely the way we are. What's a greater problem for this story than the nature of God, however, is the nature of ourselves. How can you possibly untangle pain from all our other feelings? If we were designed to never die or feel pain, then why do we have pain receptors or digestive systems, both of which are integrated into our basic functionality? And why have these traits existed in animals that predate human beings and our alleged disobedience? How would we not immediately overpopulate the earth if nobody ever died? The story attempts to answer the problems of pain and suffering by claiming that they were unintended. But pain and suffering are necessary. The real problem isn't that they exist, it's how they exist and how they manifest in reality in such ways that are blatantly contradictory to any sort of benevolence. Others have mistaken the necessity of pain and suffering as the answer to the problem itself, saying that we cannot appreciate the good without experiencing the bad. And that may be well and good for those of you who have survived your tribulations, but it doesn't do much for those who must endure agony, only for agony to result in death. The problem isn't merely that agony exists. The problem is distribution and utility. A relatively blameless person can experience unending agony, while a horrendously contemptible person lives a life of ease and comfort. Why the discrepancy? Where is the justice? Under naturalism, there's no need for an explanation because it's exactly what we should expect to see in an indifferent natural world. The religious stories, however, make the ugliness of such a reality even uglier by attempting to justify it. They blame the blameless. Perhaps they did something bad in a previous life, they say. Perhaps it's karma, they say. Perhaps they're paying for something they've done that we just don't know about, they say. Many try to explain it by saying that none of us are good, even though that doesn't answer the discrepancy itself. Theism takes our human desire for justice in an obviously unjust world and uses it to help construct the idea of an afterlife. Real justice must happen after we die, you see. But that belief only exists because it's unfalsifiable, so it can afford to exist. That's because beyond death is beyond our sight, so it leaves room for us to invent that which we so desperately want to be true. But if life should have taught you anything by now, it should be that the truth doesn't give a damn about what you want it to be. It just is, regardless. That's what makes it the truth. Not a truth, not one of many truths. The truth, period. So make up all the stories you want. Believe the stories others have come up with in the past and recorded in books slapped with the holy label. Believe all you want about what you can't possibly know. But it won't change what is. And if you're old enough to understand my words right now, then you're old enough to have learned that lesson by now, just through experiencing the general unfairness of life. There's no indication that any cosmic justice is coming. The sooner we recognize that cold, hard fact, the sooner we can concentrate on doing what we can to provide justice ourselves, because there is no justice except for the justice we create. That's what's so scary. It's up to us to take full responsibility. The reason that scares me personally is that the world is so filled with scoundrels that bully, cheat, and lie their way into places of authority that I have very little faith in our ability to create any sort of meaningful, lasting justice. How could we, while we're still so very misguided? How could we, while we celebrate fools and scoff at the wise? Should I really be calling the idea of cosmic justice immoral, though? What's so immoral about it? So often I see religious people express the idea that God will make things right in the end. Wouldn't that be nice? All the scoundrels who thought they got away with it all will one day find themselves face to face with the judge that personally witnessed them do every evil deed. All the people who suffered so much will be able to finally find happiness and fulfillment. Wouldn't that be nice? No. If there were a supremely powerful judge witnessing the scoundrels as they committed their many crimes, then why allow them to do it only to punish them later? Why allow the trauma of the innocent just to manifest a punishment for the guilty? All you're doing is doubling the misery. Why would the supremely benevolent being stand by and watch as the knife goes in, as the trigger is pulled, as the clothes are torn? What value is there in such punishment other than to satiate the bloodlust of the people who were wronged? Why not teach benevolence and goodness? Why not enlighten before crimes are committed? Why allow there to be victims in the first place so there can be punishments? Why witness the suffering only to promise peace and fulfillment later, rather than removing the suffering and injustice in the here and now? That's easily answered if there is no supremely benevolent force. So what if no justice is coming? What if there is no such God who will offer no such thing? That's what I ask of you right now. And I want you to seriously consider it. What then? What should we do? All too often, the believer will misinterpret the non-believer's skepticism as desire. Rather than seeing the problem logically, they project emotion into the equation and think we don't want there to be a cosmic judge because we don't want to be judged. It's the opposite. We want there to be justice in this world, our world. So we refuse to defer to an imaginary character for it. So what should we do? We should do whatever we can to distance ourselves from our unfair origins and make the world a fairer place. We cannot rely on a God to do anything for us. If life teaches you anything, it should at least be that. Far too many religious people are far too dismissive of this ancient problem that exists for them. They foolishly think it has been asked and answered. They may have even seen YouTube videos with arrogant titles that claim someone got wrecked, destroyed, or humiliated in some debate about it, and thus conclude that it's a settled issue. They hear things like, God wanted there to be free will, and decide, well, yeah, that's obviously it. God wanted there to be free will. Discussion over. Really? Is it? Can you even prove that free will exists? How can you claim that it's because God wanted there to be a thing if you can't even prove that thing itself exists? But if you ask me, the problem is just as persistent even if free will does exist. Because the question then arises, why would a benevolent God care more about the free will of evil people to do evil deeds than the lives and the free will of their victims? In that way, even the free will defense becomes immoral. What would you think of a policeman who stood by and watched as your daughter is raped, and that policeman did nothing to stop it because he didn't want to interfere with the rapist's decision to rape her? The idea of heaven also presents a problem for the free will story, because if heaven is a place with no evil and no suffering, yet you have free will there, then it means that evil and suffering are in fact not a requisite of free will. The free will story also implies that you cannot make meaningful decisions unless you are free to make the worst of decisions. But that's obviously not true. Why must I have the ability to commit rape and murder to have free will? Even if I were divinely prevented from so profoundly violating someone by raping or murdering them, wouldn't I still be able to use my free will to make extremely meaningful decisions in my life? Like who to be friends with, who to marry, where to live, what career to have, which hobbies to enjoy, what foods to eat, etc. I have managed to live my entire life without raping or murdering anyone, or violating anyone else in any sort of major way. And I've managed to maintain a spotless criminal record, yet I also have somehow managed to make all sorts of meaningful, major decisions throughout my life that did not include whether to commit crimes. What an amazing proof of God it would be if He made it impossible for us to rape and murder each other. And that would make it clear as well how much we are valued. Because right now, a human being can kill another human being just as easily as they can squash a bug. What does that say about how special we are? To me, it says we're purely mechanical beings, just as able to be squished into non-existence as a bug. So don't be fooled. The problems of evil and suffering are still very much fundamental problems for classical theism. But the worst and most immoral excuse of all is that God may have had good reasons for allowing the evil and suffering that we see. When they say that, it means that the perfectly good God's plan requires serial killers and cancerous tumors, you see. They don't put it that way because such language ruins the perception, but that's what it means. Would a perfectly good plan of yours demand such suffering and evil? Of course, if we're talking about the God of the Bible, then we already know that such evil and suffering can't possibly work for the greater good, because the end goal is laid out in the Bible itself. That end being a minority of chosen people getting a privileged position in the afterlife, while everyone else is either tortured for eternity or destroyed. Well, that just looks like an extension of the unfair system of elites versus commoners that we already have here in our unjust world, doesn't it?
Life is cruel. Why should the afterlife be any different?
Of course, it takes an incredibly immoral person to try to justify suffering that way. Ironically, that's one of the major reasons our world is so unfair, because of the very people who expect there to be a great cosmic reckoning in the end. We've seen the violence and suffering they've tried to justify. Yes, slavery happened, but it was a different time and a different standard, they say, as if an attitude like that could have ever changed it. Yes, there were genocides, they say, but look at what was built afterward, Western civilization. Notice the pattern. Atrocity in the name of the greater good. The sacrificing of the people in the past for the people of the future. What if I told you that you and your family have to go into the meat grinder so that some of the people in the future can live a more decadent life? Because that's your argument. Does it sit well with you when it's applied to you and yours? I bet not. But that's the mentality of those who believe they can justify evil and suffering by appealing to an as yet unseen future. The danger of that immoral story they tell themselves is that those who make that excuse for God do not stop with God. They also make that excuse for themselves, which you can see to this day. Because it's not just about distant past events like the ones depicted in the Bible. Look at what's happening in Gaza. right now. Just merely objecting to what Israel is doing will get you called a terrorist. A terrorist!
I'm on the side of Israel! You're on the side of Israel! Donald Trump's on the side of Israel! And they're on the side of the terrorists!
What do terrorists do? They actively target civilians. They kill children and babies. They do that specifically to instill terror and use that terror to discourage and demoralize, hence terrorism, often with religious justification. That's exactly what Israel is doing right now. Their leaders cite ancient holy texts in which God tells ancient long-gone people to spare nobody, including women, children, babies, and elderly, and in some cases even the animals. And they use those words to justify the killings of today.
You must remember what Amalek has done to you, says our Holy Bible, and we do remember, and we are fighting our brave troops and combatants who are now in Gaza or around Gaza and in all other regions in Israel are joining this chain of Jewish heroes, a chain that has started 3,000 years ago.
And they lie about what they're doing, too, because they understand the backlash and that appealing to their holy texts isn't going to work for everyone. For example, this is often how their atrocious actions play out. They recently attacked 16 peaceful medical workers, killing 15 of them, 15 more to add to the tens of thousands already dead. And when the backlash came, Israel's official account was that the medical vehicles approached their troops suspiciously, with their lights turned off. But a week later, when the site of the killing was accessible again, people went there to retrieve and bury the bodies. You know what they found there? They found a cell phone among the bodies. And unbeknownst to Israel and their official story, that cell phone was recording before, during, and after those medical workers were killed. You tell me, does it look like their lights were off?
It's just before dawn, and the Red Crescent paramedics and civil defense workers are answering a call to help the wounded near Rafah. Israel's military first said this convoy advanced suspiciously towards troops with the lights switched off. But you can see, these are marked vehicles and they're wearing reflective uniforms. Then, without warning, this. The shooting continues for more than 5 minutes. The paramedic who's filming says his last prayers.
No, we see in reality that they weren't. But if there was no cell phone, then the story would be accepted as reality. Not that it matters to those who don't care in the first place. And remember that the standard is already insanely low, where a death sentence can be justified by whether or not a light is on or off. See, this is the status quo during these times in which everything is recorded. We see who is being targeted and killed. We see time and time again that the stories don't match with reality. We're told to reject the evidence of our eyes and ears, as George Orwell once put it. We're told over and over again that it's the terrorists who are being killed. And if you object, well then you are a terrorist sympathizer, or even a terrorist yourself. But the truth is that terrorism is exactly what's being employed against Palestinians. The reason they target medical personnel is for terrorist reasons. It is to literally make them terrified of providing medical attention or aid of any kind, which is why aid workers are routinely attacked against international law. It's why they put explosives in beepers without regard for any innocent person who may be killed by them. A clear act of terrorism we would recognize as terrorism if done by Islamists. It is to say that the emergency lights of your emergency vehicles are not going to protect you. So who are the actual terrorists here? And if the international court charges their leaders with war crimes, as they have, then they'll smugly ignore them, come visit America, and be catered to by the President of the United States himself, a kindred spirit in escaping accountability for crimes that would land any one of us commoners in prison. There is no justice except the justice we create, and in this case, we are most definitely not creating it. It's all about stories and language. I already told you a lot about the stories religious people tell themselves, but a lot of perceptions are rooted in language too. When people target civilians, they're called terrorists. When certain nations target civilians, however, it's often referred to as collateral damage. Or they'll even say that there are no civilians in the area, even if there are. And that's because if you're in that area, even if it's your very home, then you're classified as a combatant by default. They're all considered compromised. Do they actually know the people they're killing? No. But these are the stories people tell themselves in order to justify evil and suffering. Sometimes people are even killed simply because they've been wronged so much that it's difficult to imagine them not retaliating. So they are preemptively killed before they can do so. Imagine the mere prospect of justice condemning you to die. Trump posts videos of people being killed by his orders, and the people under his posts cheer it on because they are told that the people in the video were plotting against them. Do they know? Of course not. They just listen and believe. If Congress doesn't declare war, then it's peace, no matter how many bombs you drop, because it's all about stories and language. War is peace. Orwell, all over again. The president can drop bombs and still be the peacetime president. If Hamas kidnaps people, they're called hostages. That's a terrible thing, kidnapping innocent people and holding them against their will. When we do that, however, they're not called hostages, they're called prisoners. There's an inherent legitimacy to the practice when we do it. Is that because we verify that they are hostile combatants or criminals, and we hold them in good conditions as proper due process takes place? Very much no, to an extreme degree. In many cases, we've held innocent civilians for years without trial and held them in terrible conditions in which we torture them, deprive them of food, sleep, and warmth. They become forgotten people, disappeared in the system as so-called terrorists and prisoners, assumed to be convicted when the truth is that they haven't even been charged. It's all in the language. The language they choose makes it okay. If you object, well, then you're a terrorist sympathizer, even if your objection is rooted in traditional American values. Ironically, the threat of your demonization is in and of itself a form of terrorism because it's malicious, personal, political retaliation designed to intimidate and to inflict injury, which is defamation for now, but could turn into something much more if our current political trajectory continues. Terrorism is very old. It was used in America ever since Europeans first landed upon this continent. When I was growing up, the story I was taught was that these settlers fought Indians honorably, that they lined up in formation like gentlemen and sent volleys toward the woodline where the savages released arrows from concealment like cowards, using guerrilla warfare before there was a proper term for it. But the truth is that the settlers delved into those woods and hunted down not the warriors, but the families of the warriors. They were the ones who were targeted. They found their villages, and when the warriors were gone, they burned their crops and killed all the women, children, and elderly they could find there. And they did that for two reasons. One, non-combatants could not fight back, so the settlers wouldn't have to worry about suffering casualties. And two, they wanted to demoralize and terrorize the natives. That is how we cleared the land to build our nation. A nation built upon a foundation of terrorism.
And the other thing is with the terrorists, you have to take out their families. When you get these terrorists, you have to take out their families. They care about their lives, don't kid yourself. But they say they don't care about their lives. You have to take out their families.
I'm not saying there's anything you can do about that now. What's done is done. You're not to blame. Unless you try to justify it. Because if you come up with reasons to make it okay in the past, then you're coming up with reasons to make it okay in the present. Sometimes people are baffled when I, as a non-believer, speak out against what's happening to the people of Gaza. They say that they'd oppress or kill someone like me, thereby implying that I should want to do the same to them. The Palestinians, I am told, would not accept me because I'm a non-believer. I've criticized Islam. I've even drawn Muhammad. They would kill me, so I should want to kill them. Well, I don't. I don't believe in pre-crime. I don't believe children need to be killed because of what some people think those children might do in the future, which is a biblical justification. But oppressing them could turn that into a self-fulfilling prophecy, which of course becomes the justification. And that's one of the many problems with sacrificing the people of the present to justify an unseen future. That's one of the many problems with placing a higher value on the future than the present. There was a time when Christians would have killed me for being a non-believer. Did Christians need to be exterminated in order to solve that problem? Of course not. They didn't need to be killed. They needed to be enlightened. LGBT people are also told to accept it because the people being killed would throw them off rooftops, they say. After all, they're terrorists. That's a lie. That's like saying that all Americans believe the same things and think the same way, so we should all be convicted of the same crimes. That's what we're told. And that's the same kind of thinking that made it okay in the minds of terrorists to destroy the World Trade Center, despite not knowing anybody that they were killing, other than the fact that they were in America, so likely Americans, which made them all guilty by their estimation. That's the exact same calculus we use to try to justify the killing of the Palestinians. And if you already believe the story that we're all guilty anyway, then what's the point? You can justify killing anybody that way. We're told that we would suffer by the hands of Palestinians merely because of the words we speak. That would be unacceptable here in America, where we have freedom of speech, you see. That would be unacceptable here in America, where if you object to what Israel is doing, it could get you black-bagged in the street by the government and disappeared. That's what's happening here in America now. And many of those who fancy themselves free speech absolutists will tell you that the Visa card holders don't have the same rights as Americans. You see, that's how they justify it. The Visa card holders aren't allowed to criticize America or Israel.
We gave you a visa to come and study and get a degree, not to become a social activist that tears up our university campuses.
They may have come to this country for freedom and prosperity, but they're not allowed to have it. If they dare object that this country, the country they came to, is not living up to the values it purports to have, well then, by golly, this country will outright prove them correct by black-bagging them in the street for the words they uttered. And if you think I feel safe saying these things right now just because I was born and raised here, then you're sorely mistaken, because the rules are changing on a daily basis. None of us are actually safe. We all need to take steps to rescue our liberty as Americans, because we're losing it. Not that we ever had as much as you may have thought, but we're gradually losing even what we already had. What's scary is that we're losing our freedom by actions cloaked in the idea that we're restoring our freedom. That's the absurdity of it all. We live in a backwards world in which much of the country is brainwashed to see up as down and left as right, completely broken. That, I believe, is by design, because nobody was ever going to defeat America. The only way to defeat America is to destroy it from within, to pit it against itself. And that's exactly what's happening right now. And the way you do that is with stories and language. With stories and language, you can justify anything, no matter how much it doesn't match with what is actually happening in reality. With stories and language, good can become bad, and bad can become good. The innocence of our youths become corrupted as the greedy and the powerful vie for control over our lives. You know how that manifests? You know what that corruption of innocence looks like? I'll tell you, it looks like this. You see, when you're a child, you have imaginary friends. But when you're an adult, you have imaginary enemies.